Love and Friendship is about the story of Lady Susan Vernon, a widow who is in search of a wealthy and suitable husband for herself and her daughter Frederica. The movie begins with Susan being thrown out of the home of her previous hostess, Lady Lucy Manwaring, who is a wealthy woman. Susan was caught in an affair with the man of the house, Lucy's husband Lord Manwaring, who is an attractive and charming man. Susan and her companion, Mrs. Cross, walk to the carriage that is about to take them to Churchill. They are both wearing black and are walking silently, leaving behind the broken couple. Everyone is shocked by the turn of events. The other members of the Manwaring family cry after their departure. Susan takes the road to stay with her in-laws in Churchill. Mrs. Catherine Vernon, her sister-in-law, resides with her husband, Mr. Charles Vernon, her late husband's brother. Mr. Reginald de Courcy, Catherine's attractive younger brother, also stays in Churchill. Catherine receives a letter from Susan. Her husband reads it and lets her know that Susan is coming. Catherine is surprised by her sudden visit. Reginald is aware of Susan's infamous reputation, so he informs his sister that she is about to receive the most talented flirt in the entire country. He looks at her with suspicion, questioning her judgment. Charles asserts that Susan must be a victim of rumors and believes that she is misunderstood. A woman that is so beautiful should understandably be the target of scandals of such a nature, and many women have to be envious of the good things she possesses. Reginald apologizes for the way he expressed his opinion. He still seeks to understand the reason behind Susan's change of heart. Catherine knew that Susan was happy in Langford and had found a home with the Manwarings, but she could not help but wonder why she had left everything behind. First, Susan stops by her friend's house, Mrs. Alicia Johnson. She is married to a respectable man, Mr. Johnson, who is much older than her. Alicia takes Susan inside her house as if she is trying to hide her. In fact, she had sent a letter to inform Susan that her husband forbade her to see her. Although he is away, he can come at any given moment. Susan laughs it off and calls his decision preposterous. Mr. Johnson is ready to send Alicia to Connecticut if he ever finds out that the two are still friends. Susan pushes Alicia to tell her why she can't be her friend, and Alicia explains that Lucy Manwaring wrote to her husband. Susan calls Lucy deranged and unfit for her charming husband. Then, Susan tells Alicia the way she played the game. Susan saw Lord Manwaring for the first time, and he instantly caught her attention. Capable of fooling everyone, Susan had a goal in mind and a cunning way to achieve it. She also tells her friend how she ruined the Lord's sister, Maria's, relationship with Sir James Martin. She wanted him to fall in love with her daughter Frederica, and she worked hard to achieve that. But Frederica got in the way of her secret plan and refused to marry him. On the way to Churchill, Susan talks about her wealthy brother-in-law. He takes care of her financially, and his wife is not okay with that. Susan tries to be friendly and charming when she greets her in-laws but doesn't succeed all the way. People seem wary of her and do not quickly warm up to her. She admits to Mrs. Cross that she doesn't like Catherine and that she did her best to prevent her marriage to Charles from happening in the past. Susan calls Catherine's children her projects. She uses them to win herself a place with the Vernons. Catherine invites Susan and Mrs. Cross to have some tea. Susan thanks her for her hospitality and apologizes for the short notice. She tells her she is happy to stay with Catherine because her experience at Langford, the home of Manwarings, did not suit her daughter. Susan didn't focus on Frederica's education and regretted it deeply. She blames her late husband's illness for distracting her. Reginald is eager to meet Susan. He talks about her like she is the most mysterious woman to ever walk on earth, as she is known for her bewitching nature and captivating deceit. Susan meets Reginald, and the latter is taken aback when he sees her for the first time. Susan instantly finds him interesting. Susan pretentiously speaks and says that she is using this experience to remove herself from the crippling isolation she used to know after the passing of her husband. Churchill, to her, is a place where she will get to know her in-laws and improve herself. Reginald is speechless and surprised by her eloquence and intelligence. The two start riding horses together and spend much time conversing. They get closer and grow accustomed to each other's company, while Susan particularly enjoys the process of turning someone who disliked her into her favor. Catherine's parents, Sir Reginald de Courcy and Lady de Courcy, reside in Parklands. They receive a letter from Catherine, informing them that Reginald decided to extend his stay at Churchill, and expresses worry for her brother. She fears that Susan is influencing him negatively because they have grown close. Catherine's father doesn't understand why Reginald is associating himself with Susan. He is troubled by their friendship and reads that Catherine regrets ever receiving her at her home. The concerned father leaves Parklands in a hurry, hoping to save his son from Susan's claws. Reginald meets his father and learns of the reason why he traveled all the way to Churchill. His father doesn't waste a second to tell him that his actions are deplorable and disgraceful. Reginald should remember the importance of his family name, and his involvement with Susan is shameful. It would be detrimental to everything they have ever worked for. Reginald refuses to listen to his father's vile accusations and clears Susan's name. Mrs. Cross leaves Churchill, and Susan is happy for her. She then receives a letter from Frederica's boarding school informing her that she ran away, and that she was expelled. Susan cannot believe what she is reading and wonders where her daughter might be. Frederica shows up uninvited to Churchill. Susan doesn't expect her and is not as happy to see her as the others. Frederica doesn't look well. She greets her family and runs out of the house in a rush. Susan follows her. Little by little, Frederica feels more comfortable in Churchill. She is at peace with her cousins, whom she loves very much, and finds her family loving. She watches Reginald play with his dog and smiles fondly at them. Catherine tries to start a conversation about Frederica with Reginald by calling her pretty. Reginald is indifferent to her beauty and looks for things that matter other than what is superficial. He is only interested in intelligent women because one's mind is what truly matters. Now that Frederica is in Churchill, James makes an appearance and insists on seeing her. Susan introduces him to the others, and he surprises them with his silly attitude. It's fair to say he doesn't know how to keep his mouth shut. He was confused about where Churchill was situated because he heard the place was called Churchill. He completely embarrasses Susan in front of the Vernons, and they watch him in awe, not believing someone like him exists. Susan finds Frederica alone in her room and persuades her to see James's kind heart. Susan reminds Frederica that they don't have a home, and that they stay in other people's houses. This lack of stability and comfort is Susan's source of worry. Susan could not produce an equally shrewd young girl such as herself because Frederica lacks her deceitful ways. The young girl tries to listen and learn whatever she can, but she is unable to think like her mother. Frederica refuses to see James as her husband because although she admits that he is a good man, she can't accept him as a romantic partner. At the dinner table, James once again humiliates himself before the Vernons. He keeps playing with his food like a child and behaves outrageously. Everyone is quiet around the table, but he keeps talking, mostly to himself, because no one is interested in his chatter. Reginald tells Susan that James is a ridiculous man, but she urges him to be understanding because James solely acts on his affection for Frederica. Reginald disagrees and suspects that James's silly behavior is the result of his interest in Susan. The man can't help but act like a fool in front of her. Susan corrects Reginald and tells him James proposed to Frederica because he loves her. Susan and Alicia meet outside her house to avoid her husband's wrath. She tells her about Reginald. The man is not stupid, but he doesn't warm up to people easily, and he surely has a hard time accepting emotions. Susan still prefers Manwaring because his spirit is more generous and welcoming, while Reginald's is not easily accessible. James tries his best to start a conversation with Frederica. He asks her what kind of books she reads, but he never lets her answer. He moves on to talk about Susan's interest in the Bible and then recounts the principles ingrained in him as a child. Frederica watches him the whole time and then looks down at her lap in disbelief. At a dance, everyone participates to have a good time. James happily claps and jumps as he watches the people dance. Susan and Reginald give each other meaningful looks that disclose their intentions, while Frederica stands beside him with a sad face. The next day, Reginald finds Frederica alone in the house. He asks her if she has seen Susan, but she tells him that she has gone out. It was clear to Reginald that Frederica did not look well, so he asked her if something was bothering her. Frederica hesitates at first but then says that he might be the only one Susan might listen to, comparing him to Manwaring. Reginald does not like the sound of that but decides to help Frederica, who expresses her discomfort with James's stay in Churchill. She then reveals that her mother insisted that she marries James and that she could not possibly do that because of his silliness. Reginald tries to make her see the good side of marrying a man like James but fails miserably. Frederica is not convinced, and she would rather work than spend her whole life with James, even though he would provide her with all that she desires in this world. Frederica doesn't hate James but she doesn't want him as a husband. Reginald is confident that Susan will accept Frederica's decision when she sees how bothered her daughter is by the idea of marrying a man she can't love. Reginald decides to leave Churchill. Before going, he asks Catherine to look after Frederica because she is a good girl and deserves justice. Frederica regrets speaking to Reginald and expresses her regret to Catherine because she fears that it's her fault Reginald is about to leave. His eyes are now open to the truth, and he can clearly see Susan's difficult personality. Susan speaks to Catherine about Reginald's fickle nature and doubts that he will change his mind soon. Catherine knows her brother and tells Susan that she should not expect this anytime soon because he is determined to leave. To hide her plan and to justify Frederica's unhappiness, she invents a lie about her daughter falling in love with Reginald. Susan demands a word with Reginald. He visits her room and leaves the door open. She asks him if it is true that he is really going back to stay with his parents. Reginald confidently answers and closes the door after she asks him to. Susan suggests she should do what is right and leave instead of him. She has been an inconvenience and cries that she doesn't want to be responsible for any problem with the family that has been nothing but kind to her and her daughter. Reginald looks fairly affected by her emotional state. Susan meets Alicia and tells her how close her scheme came to destruction. She doesn't understand how her own daughter almost ruined everything she worked for. Susan calls Reginald disloyal because he didn't go along with her plans for Frederica. Susan ultimately has a problem with Reginald's maturity because he can think for himself. In contrast, she believes he should naively trust her, even when she doesn't have a reasonable explanation for her actions. Susan plans to punish both Frederica and Reginald. Alicia lets her know that Mainwaring is in town. He can't get over Susan and is miserably jealous of Reginald. Susan is undoubtedly pleased to hear that. Alicia urges her to marry Reginald to get Mainwaring out of the way because the Lord is obsessed with her, and even plans to follow her to Churchill. At that moment, Mainwaring demands a meeting with Susan. Alicia tells the butler to make him wait. Frederica goes to church to pray and seeks a priest's guidance. She asks him about the fourth commandment, which her mother particularly asked her to follow. It is about honoring one's parents. The priest speaks beautiful words to her about loyalty and gratitude. She listens to him with an appreciative smile. On her way out of the church, she meets Reginald. They walk back home together. As there was a downpour, Frederica is worried about Reginald and his damp clothes and touches his arm, urging him to change into dry clothes. Her touch affects him. She quickly apologizes and walks ahead. Catherine visits Parklands one night. She is worried about what might happen to Frederica because she is positive that Susan will impose a ruthless punishment on the poor girl. Catherine thinks Reginald is blind because he now belongs to Susan. Catherine's mother begs her not to tell her father because she worries that might drive him off the edge. Susan visits Alicia and instructs her to greet Reginald back in town. She wants her friend to keep him company for the entire evening to avoid risking his and Mainwaring's meeting. Susan meets Reginald and apologizes for not having received him personally before. She is worried that Alicia might have fallen in love with him because she kept showering him with praise. Reginald thinks she is joking, but Susan continues speaking fondly of her friends. She then assures him that her absence is reasonably justified. She needed to make some necessary arrangements for them to be together. The vague answer confuses Reginald even more. Reginald asks Susan if she has considered his offer. She believes that what they have requires caution and that their feelings might seem revolting to the world. Reginald concludes that she doesn't want to marry him, but Susan asks him for more time until people around them easily accept their union. Reginald thinks that the world might never get used to the idea of their being together and is sad that things have to be this way. Susan tells him that she doesn't want to ruin his family. Also, Reginald can't believe that Susan thinks they shouldn't meet anymore because it is the necessary thing to do. He hopes that she reconsiders her decision, but when Susan's mind is set on something, nothing and no one can change it. Lucy visits Alicia's house and asks to see Mr. Johnson. Lucy is crying and is in a horrible condition because Mainwaring left her. As Alicia eavesdrops on Lucy's conversation with her husband, Reginald shows up to give her a private letter sent to her by Susan. Reginald hears Lucy's crying noises from the other room and thinks they belong to a dying animal. Just when Alicia and Reginald are about to leave the room, Lucy storms in and steals the letter from Alicia. Reginald takes it from her and tells her that the letter is not for her, assuming she recognized her friend, Susan's, handwriting. Lucy screams at him and tells him that Susan is no friend of hers. She is actually the reason behind her unhappiness, and that she is with her husband as they speak. Reginald laughs at her accusation, reassuring her that he has just seen Susan, who is entirely alone. Lucy calls for her servants so they can describe what they have seen. One of them tells Reginald that after he left Susan, she sent her servants away and invited Lord Mainwaring to her house. Once again, Lucy steals the letter, adamant about reading it aloud. In the note, Susan asks Alicia to keep Reginald at her home as long as she can, and informs her that Mainwaring is expected to visit her. Reginald is speechless and can't believe what he is hearing. Mr. Johnson also discovers that Alicia has not cut ties with Susan, even though she reassured him that they no longer speak. Alicia tells him that Susan has gone mad, which is why she wrote something so outrageous. Mr. Johnson unapologetically hints that she will soon receive the punishment he threatened her with before. Alicia stares at him, understanding what that means. Alicia runs to Susan's house and tells her the worst has happened. Susan is shocked by Lucy's actions and, even more so, by Reginald for reading the letter. She calls it ungentlemanly and can't believe his inability to deliver the private letter safely. Susan declares that she is innocent and that the others acted badly, calling facts horrid when she learns that servants have spoken against her. Susan lets Alicia know that she will make her story better with Reginald, and although that might enrage her friend, she is determined to fix this disaster. Reginald finally confronts Susan. She tries to explain that Mainwaring's visit was completely innocent, and that he came to her as his wife's friend to help him find a solution for his deranged wife. Susan tells him that her sole purpose for the visit was to persuade Mainwaring to go back to his wife. Reginald doesn't understand why she had to see him alone, and Susan, having an answer to everything, tells him that she didn't want the servants to have a reason to gossip about poor Lucy. Susan proudly informs Reginald that she succeeded in convincing Mainwaring to return to his wife. Reginald, unable to forget what he read in the letter, pressures her for answers. Susan tells him that if she really thought what she wrote in that letter was so dangerous, she would not have given it to him because she is innocent. Reginald's interpretations anger Susan. She speaks persuasively and asks him why he doubts her so much. Then, she lets him know that this has driven her to reflect on their relationship, and she concludes that she can't marry such an untrusting man. Reginald didn't expect these words from her and asks her to explain again what she really meant. Susan straightforwardly puts an end to their connection. Driven to tears, Reginald respects her wishes. He bows out of respect and leaves the room. In Parklands, Reginald's family learns of the news of his return. They also know why he is suddenly coming back. Catherine believes Susan is evil and knows what her plan entails, which is to make Reginald overwhelmed with guilt to the point where he might feel like he is the bad guy and he wronged her. Catherine knows that Susan is capable of ruining his brother as she did to many men before him. She sees Susan as a genius who uses men's vulnerability to her advantage, and compares her to the serpent in Eden's garden. Frederica has been staying with Catherine. She has been entertaining the de Courcy family with her remarkable musical talent. Then, a visitor makes an appearance in their estate. It is none other than Susan, accompanied by Charles. Frederica greets her with a scared expression, while the others are equally shocked to receive her. Susan tells them she missed her daughter and she is here to get her. Reginald's mother is disappointed to hear that Frederica will no longer be staying with them. Susan finds it astonishing that people are fighting for her company, when only a couple of months back, she couldn't fit anywhere. Catherine accuses Susan of neglecting her own child, but her words fly out of Susan's head, who tells her daughter to quickly pack her bag. Susan tells Alicia that she still expects James and Frederica to get married. She is tired of others ruining her plans. Alicia tells her that Susan should be the one claiming James instead because she wants her friend to really think if Reginald is worth having. Alicia knows that Susan can have him anytime she wants and wonders why she is playing the game like this because, after all, Susan is not gaining any benefits as long as she is unmarried. She is still a guest in others' homes. Catherine thinks she is lucky to have Charles. She asks him to take her with him to London, so that she can visit Frederica. Susan is delighted to tell Charles and Catherine of her daughter's progress in London, but the two look at her awkwardly before they inform her that they think Frederica should return to Churchill. Susan does not welcome the idea and tells them that Frederica's education is the most important thing at the moment. Charles suggests they invite one of her teachers to Churchill to continue her lessons there. Susan appreciates their persistence but argues that they are talking about London's most sought-after teachers. An invitation to the countryside would certainly not be as exciting to them as the two make it seem. Charles asks if a private tutor would do. To stop their suggestions, Susan confesses that it would be hard for her to see her daughter leave. Then, she starts asking them questions, garnering the type of answers she plans to hear. Susan is concerned that London's air might be harmful to her daughter's health. Catherine vehemently agrees and figures that fresh country air is what Frederica needs. Charles speaks about how easily influenza spreads in places like these, and Susan acts as if she is scared by that. She tells them that she is considering their offer. Then, it looks as if she is about to accept, when she reminds them again that she would be losing her daughter's company. All along, Susan had a goal, and Charles and Catherine's silence only affirms that she succeeded. Triumphant music plays as Susan leaves the house and enters the carriage to see her friend Alicia. Susan is relieved that her uncle took her daughter away. Alicia thought Susan meant what she said about missing Frederica's companionship, but Susan was not very satisfied with spending all of her time with the child. Alicia bids Susan farewell because she fears her husband might send her to Connecticut this time. Suddenly, the carriage stops, and a man comes out of the shadows. It is, in fact, James who was waiting for Susan. He looks at her with a knowing smile. Back in Churchill, Catherine looks outside her house through the large windows to watch Reginald and Frederica walking around the garden. They seem to have gotten very close. Frederica receives a letter from Susan. She reads it in front of everyone, and they hear that Susan and James are now married. Reginald can't believe that Susan chose James. Charles thinks that she may have come to love him, but Reginald finds her decision incomprehensible. Frederica is happy and wishes her mother all the best. James visits Alicia and tells her that he will soon be a father. Alicia is excited for Susan. Then, James naively tells Alicia that Susan hinted at the happy news the morning after the wedding. Alicia hears this and suspiciously looks at James, then she tells him that it is wonderful. Alicia reveals that Lucy has been staying at her house after her separation from Lord Manwaring. Alicia finds her pathetic, and James thinks that Lucy should forgive her husband because it is natural for men to stray, but the idea of women cheating is unacceptable, and it even makes him laugh. James says that Lucy's loss is now their gain because Lord Manwaring has been a guest at their house for a few weeks, and James likes the man very much. Reginald and Frederica get married. Everyone is reunited on their wedding day. Susan looks at the couple and at her husband, with Lord Manwaring by her side, knowing well that she achieved exactly what she had planned.